you are losing your attention to a thing that is actually not forming you into the sort of person you actually want to be. Most of us are aware of this. We're cognizant of it. It's not a surprise to us. And yet we find ourselves addicted. You don't want this for yourself, but you cannot stop. So that's the attention economy, to cling to the hope that at the end of all things, all shall be well, and that Christ rose again, and he is still risen, and he still sits enthroned over the universe. So there is only one who is in charge, and it is not the CEO of your tech company.
When our post-everything world has turned life upside down, how do you even know which end is up?
If you're committed to a community or a cause greater than yourself, you don't have the luxury of checking out or the freedom to burn out.
It's not enough to just keep surviving. We need to thrive again.
This is Post Everything,
a podcast about remapping culture and rethinking leadership in a liminal age.
Welcome to Post Everything. My name is John Homus, and you're about to hear my co-host Brad Edwards interview Jay Kim. Jay is a pastor of Westgate Church, located in Silicon Valley, California. And I first came across his work based on his book, Analog Church: Why We Need Real People, Places, and Things in the Digital Age. Now, what's so interesting about that book is the timing of its release. It came out at the end of March 2020. Now, if you remember, in the middle of March, that is when COVID-19 landed. And that's when the church went online. That's when everyone went online. So it's ironic that Jay's book came out just 2 weeks later, Analog Church: Why We Need Real People, Places, and Things in the Digital Age. So Brad's going to talk to him about that book and the effect it had and the time it came out. He's also going to talk to Jay about artificial intelligence. Jay writes a lot about technology. And then lastly, about being a pastor in Silicon Valley and his take on technology there. So let's get into the interview now.
All right, welcome to Post Everything. I am joined here by pastor and author Jay Kim. Jay, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Brad. So happy to be back with you.
Absolutely, man. I want to ask about one of your first books, actually, to start, because I feel like it was a lot more prescient than maybe even you had realized, I wonder, at the beginning. But your book, Analog Church: Why We Need Real People, Places, and Things in the Digital Age, it pointed everybody to this importance and primacy of actually embodied worship, analog community, and not just scripture in terms of the information, but specifically scripture that's printed on paper. And in a stroke of cosmic irony, it released on March 21st, 2020, like a week or two after school started closing and moving to remote learning because of COVID. Yeah. Churches were forced to only live stream worship. Small groups met over Zoom, and just in general, human relationships in community was otherwise just disembodied for a very significant period of time. And I, as an author myself now, I know that you always hope when you write a book, like, it's not worth going through the birth pangs of writing a book if you don't believe and hope that it's a timely help. But I can think of few things more, a more poignant example of be careful what you pray for than your book. So I'm wondering, just like in general, what was that experience like, and how was it received then versus now? Like, have you seen the engagement with it evolve or change, or is it kind of a consistent through line in that?
Yeah, it was a strange experience. Books are they take a long time. So a book comes out and you buy it wherever you buy books, and it has a release date. But typically, I don't know what the experience was for you, but every book I've written, it's a 2-year journey. So yeah. Analog Church was released in March of 2020, but I began writing it like in the middle of 2018. And it was a pre-pandemic world. I mean, certainly we were grappling with the implications of the digital age and the internet, particularly, at least in that book. I'm trying to sort of live at the intersection of the digital age and our ecclesiology. So I was grappling with a lot of that stuff, and I was talking quite a bit about the importance of embodied theologically speaking, incarnational sort of life as being imperative to the life of discipleship to Jesus. But I was doing all of that, of course, having no idea that when the book came out in that very same month, we would no longer be able to experience embodied presence with each other. I remember the book was about to come out, and the week, our last at our church, the last in-person gathering we had before the county shut everything down was the week before the book was going to come out, or a week and a half. And I gave a teaching on the book. So actually our last in-person gathering before the pandemic was a teaching on why we need to continue gathering. And we were a pretty low-tech church, and I remember jumping on Facebook Live 3 days later and saying to our church, hey, I know on Sunday we talked about why it's so important that we continue to show up, but you can't show up. The county won't let us. The publisher and I had several very intense, quick, expedited back and forths. Do we need to delay the release of the book? Is this weird? And in God's divine providence, he led us to just sticking to our guns and releasing the book. And then something happened that I didn't realize would happen. The book ended up giving, for some people, language to the sort of angst or holy discontent we continued to feel as we could no longer gather together. And, it's weird to say, but it's been over half a decade now since that moment. And I'm so encouraged by not just the responses I've gotten to Analog Church, but I'm so encouraged by how many other thoughtful voices, thoughtful leaders like yourself are continuing to move that conversation forward. Why it matters so much that as the church, we intentionally inconvenience ourselves with the hard, effortful work of showing up with one another and doing life with each other when in some ways it feels like it'd be easier to just live in isolation. So, it's kind of a gift to think back on that book.
Yeah. There is nothing to make you appreciate something than having it taken away for an extended period of time, for sure. I'm just curious, if you go back to, especially that year after, that first year after it was released, which is the kind of the biggest year of a book's life, right? I mean, I'm curious, what, as an author, you had a deeper understanding and appreciation of the things that you wrote about because you had to learn it yourself before you could teach it. And there's something about writing a book that makes you more familiar with the concepts than even the most astute reader. I'm just curious, where did you see, because of maybe the anxiety of the pandemic or just the not used to thinking about the church as robustly as you kind of the vision you have in the book, was there anything that you were surprised about that you saw pastors advocating for, or people saying that they needed, that was different from the book, or saying maybe they didn't need something that was in the book? Where did you see any disconnects in that period, and what were they?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked that question before. I didn't know what I didn't know until the pandemic. I will say this it feels quite nuts and bolts and quite specific, but one of the most consistent critiques I got about Analog Church as it was released into a pandemic world was that it did not adequately take into account or give voice to those for whom showing up to a gathering of lots of people could pose a health risk and a threat to their physical well-being. And of course, anytime I was asked that question, of course, human flourishing is at the baseline of what this is all about. Obviously, there's plenty of data that tells us for humans, naturally, belonging to a community is vital to life, and that isolation and loneliness is actually quite literally deadly. But of course, at the same time, yes, there is plenty of room and margin to say, yeah, especially during COVID, yeah, folks who had sort of compromised immune systems or whatever else, of course it's a gift that they could still stay somewhat sort of, connected to the life of the community by watching a service online or whatever it might be. So that was a bit of a surprise to me how strong that sort of pushback was. But as I peeled the layers beneath that, what I realized, this was also surprising, what I realized, just my 2 cents, I could be wrong, but at least in my sort of anecdotal conversations, as I peeled back the layers, I realized, some of this is actually deeply connected to a particular sort of ecclesiology that we have inherited from the generations that have gone before us. Specifically, sort of the church growth approach, like anything to expand reach and scale is a win. If we could get the gospel out there to more people, excuse me, if we can get the gospel out there to more people more quickly, then that's a win. That's gonna, it's good for the kingdom. And it's not black and white. I don't think that's necessarily bad. I was just listening to a Tim Keller sermon last week, and God used it to do some incredible work in me. And I'm so grateful that, while Tim is with the Lord, his work is still, through digital technology. It's still, but that's not sufficient for my formation into Christ-likeness. It's a wonderful supplement, but it cannot be everything. It's almost like a vitamin to a much more holistic, healthy diet of, of things. So I was fascinated by how much pushback there was, because it seemed like some of the ideas I was proposing went against the sort of church growth strategies that so many people seem to be peddling on the Christian church growth marketplace,
Yeah, I mean, I think the intentions behind that are, like you say, there are really good, in the sense of, we want more people to know Jesus. We want people to be affected by the gospel and transformed by it. And while you're talking, I can't help but think of, we probably had, 8 or 10 non-Christians, neighbors who, because of the pandemic and because of that isolation, were participating in our live stream worship services. And I remember that really impacting them really well. But also, there's something about the embodied nature of the church and the gathering of God's people that not one of them translated to coming to church after the lockdowns ended. And it makes me... It gave me an appreciation for just how important it is to be able to describe the truth, goodness, and beauty in the embodied church in ways that it is about the gospel. But if the church is where the ordinary means of grace are found, then we are actually doing a disservice by kind of implicitly communicating to people that you don't really need church, that this is a thing that you can just zoom in on at your convenience, and not something that is actually a training for how we pick up our cross and follow Jesus to be able to see the bride as beautiful as he does. And that, if anything, the pandemic exposed the significant deficiencies in our ecclesiology. That seems so true. And I want to ask about, you've done a lot of thinking about tech. And one of the ways that John and I describe technology on Post Everything is we describe it as a plausibility structure, right? Each technology, especially a new technology, is going to shift the horizons of what we believe is possible and what we have the capacity and ability to do. And what social media did, I remember in the heyday of social media, there being this huge promises around how this is going to connect people. And, we looked at the Arab Spring and we were like, look at the good, the democracy that this is helping to facilitate, and people are connected. This is a good thing. I don't think it's an accident that happened all before algorithms were introduced into the newsfeed. But there is this, a technology like social media will promise connection but actually preclude connection in other ways. It's going to shift those horizons by both shrinking and expanding them. When you're thinking about the moment that we're in now, especially around AI, I'm thinking about how much AI is going to shift the horizons of what is possible and preclude other things as well. What are some of the promises and precluding of things that you are foreseeing with AI and that you're anticipating with this in ways that maybe are building on some of the principles that you explored in your books, both Analog Church and Analog Christian?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a wonderful question. I think in some ways it's a complex question, in large part because when we talk about AI, we are not talking about a technology that has a particular fixed baseline and now is going to simply improve upon or build upon that baseline. The way artificial intelligence works, the way large language models work, is it's learning, and I don't want to get too philosophical here because it'll very quickly get way above my pay grade and my level of intelligence. But when you read some of the stuff from the people who are making all of this, it becomes pretty clear. They're quite public about it. Several months ago, maybe a year ago or something, there was an article in The Atlantic written by two people who are not waxing poetic. They're not philosophers. These are people who actually design this stuff. And the title of the article says it all. It was, AI is not built, it's grown. So if you look up the article online and don't even read the article and just kind of look at the image, the graphic they created for the article, it's like this computer screen, and it's sitting on some soil, and then the roots of this computer screen, you realize they're like actual roots, like of a tree. And the point that these designers are making is that they are teaching this technology through particular functionalities, but they don't understand how it's doing what it's doing. And that, again, that wades us into deep waters, philosophical waters. It can lead to conversations about the Imago Dei, what it means to bear the image of God. Can a technology bear some sort of innate image? The short answer, I would say, is no. But so all of that to say, it's different than previous technologies in that the speed and the scale, and maybe most importantly, the depth and complexity of its inner workings are changing constantly in ways that the people who are making the stuff can't even totally understand. It was actually a giant leap, a simple but giant leap in something called vector mathematics that unlocked this sort of new era of AI that we're in. Because artificial intelligence, just as a concept, has existed for decades and decades. Yeah. It's actually not new. I mean, philosophers and scientists have been writing about this for a long time. There's movies, from like 40, 50 years ago, Stanley Kubrick and others. There are films about artificial intelligences. So that's not new. What is new is the speed and the scale at which it is now finally sort of expanding and growing. So all the stuff that artists and philosophers had sort of pondered previously, some of it seems to be coming true. And nobody quite understands how or why. Excuse me. So in that sense, I think it's quite different. So then the question, maybe just as followers of Jesus, how we think about this, it becomes really tricky. But I will say, on one hand, one of the things that I have found to be helpful is because of human nature, not because of the technology itself, but because of the way human beings think about technologies, any technology, some of the ways in which this is going to affect our humanity is pretty clear. So technology in general, always, whether it was a hammer and a nail or your iPhone, technology in general is always intended, the trajectory of technology is always to move us toward increased efficiency, ease, comfort. The dream is to accomplish more while doing less. My friend Andy Crouch calls it the superpower zone. We basically are wanting to become superheroes. So you watch Superman, and he sort of effortlessly just like picks up a building or jumps and flies into the air. And it's just in him. It's just this innate ability. It's very different than watching like Rocky 4, where there's a training montage and Rocky's in the mountains of I mean, this is a kind of a dated illustration, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally, yeah.
There are these movies with these montages, and he's like effortfully doing all this work to build himself up to a particular place. Technology doesn't want that. Technology doesn't want the Rocky montage. What technology wants to offer us is Superman. It's like, oh yeah, just push a button and off you go. Just push this button. And like magic, in 20 minutes, there's a meal at your door, And that can be really helpful in some ways. But I think one of the real dangers is that the forming of anything meaningful happens only through participatory effort or effortful participation. And I think that is one of the prime dangers that lies before us with AI. That I just heard Tristan Harris, who runs the Center for Humane Design. He just recently said, I just thought this was such a great way to think about it. He said, what social media did in creating the attention economy, AI is going to do in creating what he's calling the attachment economy. Ooh. And what he meant by that was that, most of us know this because many of your listeners have probably read Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation, or they saw the Social Dilemma, or whatever it might be. Most of us know, when I doom scroll X or just mindlessly scroll through Instagram or whatever social media platform of choice you may have, you are losing your attention to a thing that is actually not forming you into the sort of person you actually want to be. Most of us are aware of this. We're cognizant of it. It's not a surprise to us. And yet we find ourselves addicted, and that is in large part how you're addicted, is like you don't want this for yourself, but you cannot stop. And so that's the attention economy. And what Tristan Harris is saying, the astute point he's making, is that AI, the way it is designed, because unlike social media, which is primarily a purveyor of content, entertaining or interesting or whatever content,
sure,
AI is beyond just the content. It's actually simulating human emotion, human reasoning, and it's creating a sort of perceived agency that is garnering not just our attention, but rather our attachment. So a good way to think about this is you don't ever open ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it is on your phone or on your laptop or desktop. You never open it the way you open Instagram. You never open it thinking to yourself like, oh gosh, I need a bit of a brain break. I wonder what's on here. You don't do that. You go to AI intentionally because typically you want to know how to make an omelet, or you're trying to figure out how to teach your kid how to throw a baseball, or your car's making a weird noise and you're going to get it checked out, and your mechanic said he's got to fix the carburetor and it's going to be $800, and you're like, should a carburetor in my area cost $800? You're just doing kind of benign stuff, getting information. But the more you do that, and the way AI responds to you, it creates this sort of attachment on a relational level. It becomes this always ready, always available, always sort of spot on with the information you need sort of mechanism that just lives in your back pocket. And soon enough, and there's plenty of data that is showing that this is already happening, particularly with emerging generations, as the attention economy has robbed all of us, but especially emerging generations, of their ability to connect with real life humans. I mean, like Jonathan Haidt and Jean Twenge, they've done all that research on sort of how many kids, like how few kids go out with their friends on Friday nights, and how many kids are just connecting via digital mediums or staying at home and just glued to their screens. As we've been robbed of our ability to connect deeply with another embodied human, now insert into that sort of meta-narrative a tool, a device that is always ready to connect with you for anything you need. We are now exposed, and we're on the precipice of the attachment economy. We're going to begin attaching. Of course, it always begins this way, as do most human relationships. You know what I mean? Brad, you and I sat over drinks, a couple of years ago in a hotel in Indianapolis. We had known of each other, but we had not yet met. And so in the early stages of that conversation, it was kind of the normal informational stuff. Like, hey, tell me about the table. And how's this going? It's like, oh, how do you know each other here? And eventually over time, it turns into a much more engaged, much more deeply sort of intertwined relationship of trust. Well, the same thing's going to happen with AI. We have an entire generation of people who are excruciatingly lonely and isolated. And now here comes this wonderful little thing in our back pocket that is always affirming, always prepared to give you whatever answer you need, ready to talk, wants to talk. And so, now you have the increase of people using AI for all sorts of companionship. I heard recently someone else say that what internet pornography did to men, we are already beginning to see AI doing to women.
Oh, wow.
Meaning women, especially men too, but women especially, are beginning to find deep companionship with artificial intelligence. So I think that's I just talked for a very long time, but I think that's some of the stuff we need to keep our eye on, and as as followers of Jesus, ask real meaningful questions like, is this really the way to be human?
No, that is wow. The attention versus attachment economy. I had not heard that from Tristan Harris just, but I had heard him talk about how social media was functionally synthetic mediation. It was mediating and connecting relationships, but synthetically so. And what AI is actually synthetic relationship, and that is that attachment economy, the building blocks of it. So, but and I think your point about how the way that the act of conversation is this attaching vehicle, it makes me think about Marshall McLuhan's "The medium is the message." Right? It is an intentional design choice to make these chatbots very highly relatable. And when you realize that it's actually building on the way that social media has, in a very real sense, groomed and conditioned us to view the screen and like, this is a human being. We've been doing that for 15 to 20 years now. And so the chatbot is this bait and switch kind of relationship that is 100% intentional and a conscious decision. And if anything, that just realizing that really helps me feel less attracted to using AI in ways that are problematic and dangerous. But like, I'm Marshall McLuhan, again, one of his less well-known but still pithy quotes is that there is no human amplification without amputation. And if we are in a loneliness epidemic now and are already I think Derek Thompson, former staff writer at the Atlantic, has written significantly about this, how we are not in an age of isolation so much as we are in an age of, or actually it's not an age of loneliness as much as an age of self-imposed isolation, that we're actually starting to prefer this more. And that's demonstrating the ways that AI especially is amputating not just our ability, but also our affections for embodied community and relationship that just is so, I mean, I can just think of few things that pose a greater potential threat to the church's ministry if we are not able to name, label, identify, and help our people navigate that. So here's a question that flows directly from what you're saying then. At the table, saying this to you is probably cute, but we talk about how Boulder is a Silicon Valley of the Rockies, right? And there's a whole lot of tech companies and jobs, and I would say probably 70% of our congregation, full-time working people, are either in tech or adjacent to tech in some way. A lot of engineers. And one of the tensions I'm already seeing is guys, men and women feeling like I have no choice but to train my replacement. And that's the feeling. That's how they articulate it. Is I feel like I'm training my replacement and if I don't, I'm fired. And this is probably the last job I'll have doing what I've been trained and educated to do. And so there's this real existential feeling of like, I've got a gun to my head. I have to use AI, but I also know, Brad, all these things that you're saying are really dangerous. How do you encourage them, and how do we practically, as pastors and ministry leaders, help our people and equip them to live in this world but not be of it, to be exilic disciples who are following Jesus and faithful in the midst of these industries that, frankly, I don't think there is a choice. It's not like we can all become Luddites. How are you navigating that tension, especially in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, well, one, Brad, as a fellow pastor serving in a city that, like you, a high percentage of the people who live here and a significant percentage of the people who call our church family home, they work in tech, and same tension. I can relate. And, I think the first thing I'll say is I try to hold the tension, and I try to hold the fear and the anxiety and the pain with them a bit, by acknowledging that I don't have clean, pragmatic answers. I don't, but I do know what it feels like to live in that sort of existential dread. Like, is this all coming to an end? Am I going to have to reinvent my career? And then the just the real practical fear. What happens when this job doesn't exist? And by this job, I don't mean this job at this company, but like literally this industry. The vocation doesn't exist. I've been training my entire life to do this. I'm good at this, but now here comes a machine that can do what I do in a matter of seconds or minutes, and what do I do? And in that way, it is no different. I mean, it's different, but there are some strong parallels to just sitting with a congregant who's navigating chemotherapy, and they're not sure if they're going to make it. And so there is on offer for all of us when there is either literal physical death that is before us, or the death of a vocation, or the death of a particular life you thought you were going to have for the decades to come, and that's coming to an end maybe. I think pastorally, the calling is the same, to sit with them in the pain and to navigate lament with them, and then to cling to hope, to cling to the hope that at the end of all things, all shall be well, and that Christ rose again, and he is still risen, and he still sits enthroned over the universe. So there is only one who is in charge, and it is not the CEO of your tech company. And I know that's not a practically helpful thing to hear, but when there is impending death, whether literal or the death of a dream or a career or vocation or whatever, those are the moments that we are pushed to the edges of our theology, and we have to ask real questions. Do I actually, not just in my head, but do I, in my body, in my thoughts, in the decisions I make, do I really believe this stuff that I sing about and that my pastor preaches about, And I just try to gently guide along those lines. Pragmatically, I think one of the things that's been interesting in my conversations with friends and congregants and family members who are navigating this real tension, working in tech and having reached sort of the heights of success for many of them, and now watching the potential for all of it to come crumbling, crashing down, and very quickly. That's the other thing that is so hard. This is not like, okay, this is probably like a 15-year trajectory, so I'm going to game plan and figure out a way. No, I mean, like, a lot of these folks are thinking like months, It's like, how many more months before my team just gets eliminated here, And one of the things that's been helpful is I've asked the question of curiosity and the gift of what I would call meandering. So I find it interesting with AI in particular. It's built, its effectiveness, at least at a sort of economic level, these big giant AI companies. The reason they are making money hand over fist, the reason their valuations are skyrocketing, it's all based on its speed, its accuracy, its effectiveness, its efficiency. So AI companies are not trying to build better models that go slower or that sort of slow down the person to turn left when everything in them says go right. It's the whole thing is essentially built on how quickly can I get you the thing you're asking for or the thing I think you want, right? And that's great. That's great when I'm, again, trying to figure out what do I do with these leftovers in my fridge? How do I reheat, this whatever steak without drying it out? Tell me. And then boom, it tells me. And that's great. But there are much more important sort of human existential situations, circumstances, moments, and longings and desires that efficiency and even accuracy in some ways work against. There are key components of human experience that actually require long, slow, steady curiosity. Just continuing to ask the question. I think often about my son who's 7, and he does what all 7-year-old boys do. He asks me why about everything.
Of course.
Hey bud, go brush your teeth. Why?
Just trust me on this one, man. Please. Just take my word for it.
Exactly. Yeah, but it always leads to, mostly I get frustrated, but if you really think about it, it always leads to really interesting conversation. Well, you're going to get cavities. Well, why? I don't know, man. That's just what the dentist says. Like, yeah, but why? Why does that happen? Why do I get cavities? What is a cavity? It's like, I don't know, man.
The fall.
It's just like the fall. Exactly. Exactly. Well, it was Adam and Eve, bud. That's why we get cavities, But connecting those dots is the way in which my son is growing and developing. And it's not even knowing the answer. What he really needs is not like, give me the data on how cavities are formed in teeth. What he needs is the ability to use his mind in such a way that leads him down paths where he will begin to learn things that he wasn't even necessarily interested in learning. And that is what will form him. And that's what I would call like meandering through life. This is what preachers do all the time. Is like, I think the best preachers are the ones that don't just extract a couple of things from a couple of commentaries and call it good. Say, oh, that's a good line. This is a good line. Boom, boom, boom. Here's my 3-point sermon. The best preachers are the ones when they are communicating the gospel, you listen to them and you realize, oh, they took like a long sort of unplanned trek through this text. They meandered through this text and they invited God by his Spirit to go on that walk with them. And what I am receiving is the gift of that sort of surprising, unexpected journey. Now, again, going back to the existential question that real people are asking is like, okay, Jay, well, what does that have to do with my vocation? I'm going to need to pay the bills. And I understand that. And what I'm saying about curiosity and meandering don't necessarily answer that question. Other than to say, is there a world coming where, going back to Marshall McLuhan, he had his 4 laws of media. And essentially, he said that, by media, those who are unfamiliar, by media, he didn't mean like NBC News. He meant like any extension of human capacity, any medium that could extend human capacity. So he said that any technology or medium that extends human capacity always inverts in on itself, and it works against that human capacity. So prime example is the phone. And he said, what was the original telephone? It was intended to help individuals or people, communities connect over long distances. And then you go through what the technology does when it gets pushed to its extreme. Now you can go to a coffee shop or a family dinner table and see people who are literally sitting across from each other, completely disconnected because of what? Their phone. This is what technology often does. It reverses in on itself when pushed to its extremes. So when you think about AI, and I don't know this is the case for sure, but what human capacity is artificial intelligence intended to sort of extend? Well, lots of things, but essentially human intelligence. It's supposed to push human intelligence to the extreme. It's supposed to make us Superman, or like the smartest person on earth, essentially, is what it is supposed to do. And the really frightening thing there is when pushed to its extreme, if Marshall McLuhan is right, what does that mean? We will lose the ability to think.
Yeah.
We'll lose the ability to thoughtfully process and experience all of life. So in such a world, who are the sorts of people who might be the most invaluable people? It's the folks who are curious.
Yes.
It's the ones who can ask the best questions. It's the people who are able to meander through ideas and extract stuff that most of us would miss because we no longer have the ability to mine the depths. Because I push a few buttons or I talk into my phone, it just gives me the answer. And so on a vocational level, in the long run, I do think there might be something there. That if we can cultivate curiosity, the ability to take long, unexpected journeys through ideas and processes and whatever else, that might bode well for us moving forward into an age when AI is going to be ubiquitous,
I love that answer for so many reasons. I mean, you're connecting a lot of dots in really helpful ways for me because, I mean, we're already seeing what you just described as like losing our cognitive capacity. I know there's a ton of studies that are being done right now that even infrequent AI use has an effect of cognitive offloading in your brain. This isn't just a discussion of like what do we value or like the spiritual ramifications. It has physiological consequences, and we know this from the phones already because I don't know about you, but like I'm trying to not use Google Maps because I realize just that places where I have been many times, not several times, many times, I am incapable of finding my way there without plugging it into Google Maps because my brain's I don't have to remember that anymore.
Yeah, I'm guilty too. Yes.
Oh my gosh. And I'm like literally trying to, like my wife will have the Google Maps up while I'm driving and be like, tell me if I'm going the wrong way, but I need to try and do this without it. And I have there's a friend of mine. He's at the table who's an instructor of design at a public university. And when a question comes up in class, he'll often see his students pulling up their phones, and he'll stop them and he says like, "Hey, how about this? What if we just don't know? Like, what if we don't actually find the answer? Like, let's let it be a mystery." And they just look at him like, "What? Why would we do that?" He's just like, let's do it right now. Like, what are the other questions that come up for you because you don't know the answer to that one? Like, what are some other ways of doing this? Like, and what he's doing is he's actually teaching them how to be a critical thinker in ways that maybe they haven't actually encountered up to this point because of the smartphone. Never mind AI. And I literally had this moment with my oldest son. He's 9.5, and he's in third grade, so he just hit that point where like school isn't like, it's kind of a drag. It's starting to become a drag now, and like, oh, do I have to go back to school? He's just like, well, why? Because like he's like, I can just look it up if I want to know it.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is very good and important. You've heard your mom and I talking about AI and how all of this stuff is happening. Well, you don't need to just learn information. That's not actually why you're in school. What you're learning is how to think, because that's something that AI can't ever do for you. And if you let it, you will actually not it will be worse than not going to school.
Yes.
And so I love that your curiosity and meandering as a spiritual discipline. That connects so many different dots about like what it means to bear the image of God, right? Because God didn't give Adam and Eve an already cultivated world. He put them in a garden that was cultivated, but then he said, continue to fill the earth and subdue it. And I think that if there's anything about like, what actually makes humans distinct, because I think we need to do some serious work around having a theological anthropology to be able to say, like, here's what AI will never be able to do. And knowing what we uniquely as human beings can do is going to be really important to resist both the temptation to use it, but also the fear and anxiety that we could be replaced. Because I don't think, I think a lot of the fears around that are in some ways overblown. Because, I mean, just looking historically, the period of disruption that comes with technological innovation is real. But long-term, human society does adapt. And there are dehumanizing implications, but also rehumanizing implications that I think we can look forward to. And I think that will help us be able to anticipate those a little bit more. But, man, I love so much the way that you talk about curiosity and meandering.
Yeah, I love what you just said about your conversation with your son, because I see that all the time. Because we've lived for so long in the information age, even before the internet, with the television age, you can think about some of the work of Neil Postman, some of the things he wrote 40 plus years ago now. And we've just, that's the age that we've been born into, basically all of us. And so it's not surprising that your son and my son, they would ask questions like, Dad, why do I have to learn how to do this? I can just, my kids, they despise math, and I do too a little bit. But,
Sure,
but they're learning these concepts, and they ask me all the time. They ask me that all the time. It's like, Dad, why do I have to learn how to do this? One, my daughter especially, who's in 5th grade, so she's a little older. She's like, Dad, I'm gonna forget this the moment I'm done taking the test. Why am I wasting my time? I can just type it into this. And she's smart enough to know, it's like, Dad, no grown adult goes to work and uses this method to do something at work. They just type it into a thing. Why do I have to learn it? And yeah, I say almost verbatim the exact same thing. It's like, yeah, you're right. You're probably going to forget this particular bar model methodology for multiplication or whatever. That is not the point. The point is your brain is a muscle. And if you do not exercise it, by thinking, by like mentally straining to a certain extent, and you don't do that all the time, you're going to lose the ability. And you said it with AI. It's like AI is going to rob us of the ability to think, because it's just thinking for us. And then we will find ourselves at certain moments in life where there is no technology that's going to be able to navigate, for example, the grief and lament of the loss of a loved one. And then you will find yourself cognitively unable to grapple with what you feel happening in your body. And you'll go to AI and it'll give you some pithy answer, that it's deriving from its large language model of all the psychologists around the world. What have they said about grief? And you will read it. You'll read the information and you'll be left like utterly dissatisfied. Because in those moments you'll realize like I don't need the information about how to process. What I need is like, as an embodied human, to be able to step into this journey for myself and actually live it thoughtfully and deeply. And yeah, if we don't teach our children and maintain our own ability to think with curiosity and depth, then we're in real trouble. Yeah.
I mean, talking about grief. I wrote an article for Christianity Today talking about AI poses a digital divination, and there is a part in Deuteronomy where God tells his people like some things are going to be completely and utterly forbidden to you. Divination and necromancy is one of them.
Yeah,
and I cannot help but think about the way that the further along we go, when people come to end of life and they die of natural causes, how and this is already happening you can send an AI company all of the audio and videos of your loved one, and they will create an AI that is trained on that person's audio, video, and written content, and you can in a way avoid the grief of losing them in ways that I'm like, I don't think that this is actually good news. Like, I understand what this is promising, but like, what do we lose when we're unable? We actually lose the practice of grieving itself, not just like forgetting how, but like maybe it doesn't happen to a significant degree. And I'm like, I can't help but think about how that is the case. Let me ask this: you put in Analog Church. You have this great quote. You point out that the church was never meant to be a derivative of the cultural moment, but rather a disruption of it. And part of what I think is so helpful about that reminder that it's not just that we're called to like live in the world but not be of it. We're also called to, in a sense, disrupt aspects of the world by our sheer presence. And I'm curious, like, what is it besides the like insistence that we're describing right now of like experiencing the full range of human emotions, maybe? I keep thinking about how formation itself, like an awareness of how human beings are formed and shaped, is going to become, if not already, is a superpower that maybe there's a way that our insistence on a healthy and actually humane formation becomes a disruption to this kind of hyper efficiency culture. But I'm curious, like, how are you thinking about that? Is that what you see, or like, what are the ways that you would see the church being a holy disruption in a good way that's actually a blessing to our neighbors?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot about the sort of pillars upon which AI specifically, but just digital technology in general is built. And it's something we've already talked about briefly. It's something I get into quite a bit, I think, in Analog Church. But, you know, there's the digital age is, companies do not put out tools that make your life harder. They don't put out tools that are like increasingly less accessible. You got to go and work harder to find them. You know, they don't put out tools that are intended to inconvenience your life. Understandably so. Nobody would pay money for that stuff. You know, it's like, what is this social media app that is super boring and impossible to navigate? You know, nobody does that. So in many ways, what that means is, and this is kind of a gross generalization, but I think it's generally helpful, at least that has been for me and for our church community here. The digital age it's all about accessibility. It's all about relevance. Like it's got to be up to date. You know, like you open your phone and you go to the app store. It's like every 2 days, update your 48 apps or whatever. You're just like constantly updating to be as accessible and relatable and up to speed as possible. And then the digital age, again, it's all about convenience and ease. You know, I push a few buttons and I have groceries at my door. I push a few buttons and there's a car now that's going to drive me wherever I want to go. And now, you know, with certain technologies, like there's no driver. It's literally just a car, you know, and it drives itself. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't even have to inconvenience myself with the slight awkwardness of like, hello, like I don't have to do anything. I just get in and it takes me, you know. It's just increasingly convenient and easy. And what's interesting to me is when you look at church history, and this is something, you know, that you've been so helpful to me and to so many people, Brad, with some of your work. It seems to me that from its earliest days, the church has always been most dynamic and effective when it zigs as the world zags. Like she shines, the church, she shines the brightest when the colors with which she paints are so dramatically different than just the muted tones of culture all around. And I think one of the real dangers with something we talked about a while back, the sort of the marriage between business growth models and our ecclesiology. One of the real dangers is that subtly and insidiously, it's sort of taught church leaders and pastors and congregants that we need to make the church super accessible.
Man.
And we need to make it really relevant. How many, and I love the church in all shapes and sizes. So I'm not throwing shade at anybody, but I'll just be honest. Like, how many church advertisements have you seen come through your feed where it says something like, join us on Sunday, we have relevant messages or something. And I get what you mean. Like, of course, and I would agree to a certain extent. I do want the preaching life of our church to be like boots on the ground. I want it to actually mean something in your actual lived life. But typically what that sort of marketing approach means is not that. It's more like relevant messages, meaning like we're cool and hip, and you're going to hear us talk about the latest Taylor Swift album during the service. It's like so good.
Yeah.
We're not weird is what it's. Yeah, exactly. That's the best way to put it. We're not weird. And I get that to a certain extent. And, churches, we are working so hard to make our church convenient and easy and in and out, and just drop your kid off here and do this and then show up, and you don't have to do anything, just sit there and listen and sing if you want to or don't, or it's all of that. Like, just scan this QR code, you don't even have to get up and go to this person, just do all of this. And when we do that, like when we make the church accessible, utterly approachable, then the church is just like everything else. And when we are just all pursuing ecclesiological relevance or something with culture, and it's completely relatable to everybody, then the church is just like everything else. And when the church is convenient and easy in the digital age, then the church is just like everything else. And when I look at church history, when the church becomes like everything else is when the church is least effective.
Oh, man.
So are we at a time when the church needs to be a bit more weird, like a bit more peculiar, different, set apart, transcendent, Like, should we be a little bit like, no, it is a little weird, but it's a little weird because the stuff we're exploring and experiencing here is not the stuff of earth. It's like no company made this, and it's kind of a mystery, and we're just stepping into it together, and we think it can change us, and I'm just seeing actually on the ground in a very hopeful way. There are so many people who have no religious background, or they deconstructed their faith. It's been such a beautiful gift. I'm seeing so many of those folks step in and say, no, man, actually I am looking for something a little weird.
Yeah. Wow.
I am looking for something a little different.
Yeah. When everything around you is promising you greater ease, how attractive will it be to actually say, no, I actually believe you have the capacity to be challenged, to aspire to something that actually resembles more picking up your cross and following Jesus. And that actually there's resurrection on the other side of that death. Man, you're touching on something that the last kind of area I'd love to pick your brain on and run something by you. I have this kind of working theory. Tim Keller talked about how we need to plant churches in cities because cities are the kind of central culture generating nexus of a broader culture. Culture is made in cities. We've been talking a lot so far about how technology is a culture shaper in many ways, but the people who are designing those technologies are in Silicon Valley, where you are living, working, and doing ministry. And my kind of running theory is that increasingly we're starting to see that it's not just cities in general. Cities are actually being shaped and formed not just by technology, but also the culture of one particular city, of Silicon Valley. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that too, because I'm especially thinking about this in general, like the kind of hyper efficiency and optimization that you're talking about. That is for sure, like that is shaping cities in ways that I don't think anybody would argue about. But what about some of the more esoteric kind of cultural values and beliefs that I feel like if you're on Twitter, even just to lurk, you're seeing Brian Johnson talking about not just optimizing his life, but also becoming, living forever. And the way transhumanism and this kind of functional digital Gnosticism that a whole lot of people who live and work in Silicon Valley are talking about and saying is actually a good thing, that we should aspire to this online. I'm curious, do you see that kind of being exported from Silicon Valley into churches? Is it like beyond the way that the medium is the message and the use of technological devices are shaping us? Do you see some of those beliefs kind of escaping orbit of Silicon Valley, or is that a little bit more like in Estes Park, Colorado, we have what's called frozen dead guy days, where there is a millionaire who died, but he has his head being cryogenically frozen in hopes that someday he'll be resurrected. And there's this huge festival of largely hippies who gather there every year. Like, is that's not escaping orbit out of Estes Park, but like, do you see the transhumanism and Gnosticism of Silicon Valley having maybe a greater reach because of the technological design? Those are the people who are designing it.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think there's been a lot written publicly about. I will say at this particular moment, as we're recording this, the sort of like transhumanism movement is large and widespread, but the pursuit of human immortality, which is sort of a subset of transhumanism, which is a much larger conversation, that the sort of very direct pursuit of human immortality, I think, is still not fringe. It's still it is very much on the sort of, it's center stage, but in many ways it's center stage because it feels so wild. What's interesting to me is that it names a particular ache that is in every human being, which is that death feels wrong, and that we should, it doesn't feel right that there's a sort of finitude to human experience. And so in that way, actually, at least here in our little corner of the world in Silicon Valley, we've seen that lead to some really interesting conversations and genuinely a renewed interest amongst a surprising sort of category of people in technology, a renewed interest in spirituality and specifically the Christian story. So one small example of that is we run something here that many churches run called Alpha, which is a space for, skeptics and doubters and people who've deconstructed faith or never had faith at all. And the last 3 years, we've just seen Alpha change, and we've not changed anything. We're doing the same exact thing, but we've watched so many more people come. And it's our own people at our church who are just inviting friends and coworkers and neighbors. And they were doing that before, but most of the time people were like, sounds interesting, but not much time. I was just with our Alpha group last night, and it's just a room full of people who are working in tech, who are asking all sorts of fascinating questions, driven by this sort of conversation that is ongoing. Like, what does it mean to be human? And why the finitude? Why is it that there is, such hardship and pain and suffering in the world? And does it have to be this way? And will technology truly save us? So there's a lot of, for example, with AI, like in medicine, there's a lot of really fascinating, interesting stuff happening. Just up the road from here at Stanford University, there are some brilliant men and women doing incredible work, leveraging AI along the lines of, for example, like cancer research and the possible eradication of ovarian cancer. That's like, we're very close to possibly being able to identify the origins or the possibility of ovarian cancer in women, to the point where there's real conversation that like, I think we are not far off from being able to possibly eliminate ovarian cancer specifically. And so there's a lot of those types of conversations that are sort of dancing together. And it's all leading to this larger conversation about what it means to be human, and do we really have to die? And so I think there's tremendous opportunity in that conversation. I don't worry myself too much with the Brian Johnsons of the world who are just like going crazy and I'm going to live forever. And maybe you will. And at that point, I'll have to reckon with all sorts of things theologically. But at this point, it doesn't seem like you're going to live forever, as healthy as you are or whatever. But I am grateful for the ways that this sort of pursuit amongst a certain swath of people is leading to really fascinating conversations that I think are opening the door to the gospel, essentially, for people who are in desperate need.
That's beautiful. You're reminding me. I think it was on the Mere Fidelity podcast. I think it was Derek Rishmawi who said, he said it's fascinating to me. I've observed that the more our capacity is grown by technology, and the more our technology becomes really powerful and impressive, the less we have been thinking of ourselves as human beings, like the ways in which that capacity and that just the incredible power of technology is becoming like this mirror where we're actually valuing ourselves even less and humanity even less. And that alone, I'm just struck by how, like, what an opportunity is that if that becomes even more widespread and the longer it goes on, the more there's going to be a longing for some kind of, shall we say, good news about human beings and the place and the value we have in the eyes of our Creator in ways that the thing that we have created, intending to be a reflection and bear our image, is actually devaluing us in a way. And I'm just like, I'm struck by how the love of the gospel, I think you're right. I think that we are facing an incredible opportunity that's coming down the pike in that. And that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Man.
Well said.
Well, let me ask just one more question and we'll end with this because, if someone who's listening to this and they're like, man, my head is spinning, around just like, wow, there's so much here to be thinking about and to be anticipating and be, as much as you can, at least be prepared for, if not planned for. If you could just give one thing to someone who's listening, like if you could just do one thing that would situate you well to weather all of the change and disruption that we're worried about and we've been talking about, what would that one thing be?
Man. Well, they're connected. I think two thoughts come to mind. One, I forget exactly who said this. I read it in a book recently, but it was one of the most accurate it was one of the most accurate descriptors of the cultural moment we find ourselves in. This writer said, we live in an age where we are insatiably addicted to the interesting. We need everything to be interesting. And that makes me think quite a bit about the biblical invitation to be sober-minded. Because I do not think you can be sober-minded and stimulated at the same time. Stimulated meaning, of course, at a deep sort of soul level, like the spirit animating you, of course. I just mean stimulated in the shallow sort of digital age, social media. This is interesting. That's interesting. That sort of shallow stimulation. You cannot be sober-minded and shallowly stimulated at the same time. We have to choose. And because we have access to so much content, and now we have access to AI that can tell me everything about anything, anytime I want. Our addiction to the interesting is just, I think it's increasing and deepening. And so we face a tremendous challenge in living as Christians who live with sober minds. Because you cannot have a sober mind and have shallow stimulation at the same time. So that's what I would say. I think there's a depth that God, by His Spirit, wants to cultivate in us as He forms us into Christ-likeness. that only happens slowly and steadily with sober mind and surrender and submission. And everything in culture and these little devices in our back pockets, it's all designed to keep us shallowly stimulated with the shallowly interesting. And unless we're intentional, we're going to be formed into a people we don't want to be formed into. We're going to be formed into a people that God doesn't intend for us to become. And so that's what I would say. I think that particular practices and habits are not just good things, they're necessary things for Christians living through the digital age and now the age of AI.
Man, yeah. What is stimulating versus what resonates. And I mean, this is really good news for boring preachers that like actually what our people need is to do a dopamine fast every Sunday morning. And
yes.
So, wow, Jay, thank you so much. This is extremely helpful. And, at the end of the day, I'm leaving this conversation extremely encouraged because you're giving handholds to the ways in which Jesus has promised that he is going to build his church and the gates of hell can't stand against it. And if that is the case, then, nothing that comes out of Silicon Valley coming out of Silicon Valley is going to harm the church's mission, nor is there anything that can't be redeemed in Christ. Yeah. And so thank you so much for joining us and for thinking so critically and so well about this stuff. This is really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Brad. Love talking to you.
Likewise, man. Take care.
Thank you for listening. If you found this episode helpful, text it to a friend. Please take a minute and rate this podcast. Leaving a review helps other people find us and connect. You can send us questions or feedback by emailing us at posteverythingpod@gmail.com. Thank you.